Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Hope the week's gone well. We had a bit of rain, but it's now beginning to warm up a little. But we're very grateful for the rain. Let me start with some macro thoughts. The quote of the year, perhaps the decade. Those quarterly results were fully baked 3 years ago, so today I'm working on a quarter that will happen in 2020, not next quarter. Next quarter is done already, and it's probably been done for a couple of years. Jeff Bezos, Amazon, as it sets itself to cross $1 trillion market cap. Home thoughts. Rwanda's Volcanoes National Park has been awarded first place in the 2018 Sustainable Destinations Top 100 Best of Africa Awards. Lovely photograph from Illume Editions. This, a mother and her cub photographed in Tsavo East National Park, Kenya. Tsavo is extraordinarily large. There's no one else around except you. And it's a fantastic landscape. Where it all really started, taken with remotes in Amboseli, Kenya, some 6 years ago. It is still up there as a shot, and certainly as a memory. That's David Yarrow. The Amboseli is a tremendous place as well, home of elephants, because of the swamp, and you have Mount Kilimanjaro in the background. I like this from Sabi Reserve, a fantastic close-up of a woodland kingfisher sitting perched up a tree. And that took me back to Halcyon days. Alcyone threw herself into the sea, whereupon the gods transformed them both into halcyon birds. Kingfisher. That was a woodland kingfisher of Sabi. The story is that it's from the Latin Alcyone, daughter of Iulius, wife of Ceyx. When her husband died in a shipwreck, Alcyone threw herself into the sea, whereupon the gods transformed them both into halcyon birds, into kingfishers. When Alcyone made her nest on the beach, waves threatened to destroy it. Aeolus restrained his winds and kept them calm during 7 days in each year, so she could lay her eggs. These became known as halcyon days, when storms do not occur. Today the term is used to denote a past period that is being remembered for being happy and or successful. I like this Sylvia Plath. Out of the ash I rise with my red hair, and I eat men like air. Plot twist, this is from John Paczowski. Amazon confirms Alexa devices are randomly laughing, but it's unable to determine why, and any attempts to stop the laughter are thwarted. I thought to myself, this is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper, and with the machines not responding to our orders. Of course, those words were quoted from The Hollow Men, Mr. Kurtz, he dead. The 5th stanza, here we go round the prickly pear, prickly pear, prickly pear. Here we go round the prickly pear, 5 o'clock in the morning. Between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act, falls the shadow. For thine is the kingdom. Between the conception and the creation, between the emotion and the response, falls the shadow. Life is very long. Between the desire and the spasm, between the potency and the existence, between the essence and the descent, falls the shadow. For thine is the kingdom. For thine is, life is, for thine is. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. Have a listen to T.S. Eliot reading The Hollow Men in his own words. That link is from YouTube. Political reflections. Trump hails great progress with planned to meet Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un talked about denuclearization with the South Korean representatives, not just a freeze, Trump said on Twitter late Thursday in Washington. Also, no missile testing by North Korea during this period of time. Great progress being made, but sanctions will remain until an agreement is reached, a meeting being planned. White House spokeswoman Sarah Huckabee Sanders said earlier the meeting would occur at a place and time to be determined. The location for the meeting and details such as who will be present are up in the air, an administration official said. Adding that Trump plans to speak by phone soon with President Xi Jinping. Kim is set to meet next month with South Korean President Moon Jae-in across the border, the demilitarized zone. We need to talk to North Korea, Lewis wrote, but Kim is not inviting Trump so that he can surrender North Korea's weapons. Kim is inviting Trump to demonstrate that his investment in nuclear and missile capabilities has forced the United States to treat him as an equal. So I think, in his mind, he's meeting Trump at a moment of equilibrium. In September 2017, I was saying, when you view things from Kim, the Rocket Man's perspective, he is speaking the language that his adversaries understand lucidly. And I was saying then one of the strategies of the pre-regime change moment had been to demonize the other leader. And front and center in Kim's mind must be the image of Saddam Hussein being hung by his neck, and of Muammar Gaddafi meeting his death after having been sodomized with a bottle. When you view things from Kim Rocket Man's perspective, you might appreciate that far from being illogical, he is in fact being ruthlessly logical, speaking the language his adversaries understand lucidly. Asia Times asks, is this the breakthrough the world has been waiting for? And they say it's not clear whether Kim is acting out of a fear of Washington, of confidence in his own position, or of the opportunities for rapprochement offered by the administration in Seoul. Trump, of course, accepted Kim Jong-un's invitation to meet rather than lower-level meetings because it makes sense to accept an invitation to meet with the one person who can actually make decisions. And then another official says President Trump has made his reputation on making deals. So we have a very interesting moment in geopolitical affairs. I think actually Kim is coming from a position of strength. He's not going to give up his weapons, but he's going to use this as an opportunity to deal directly with the US president, which is something that North Korean leaders have been looking to do for quite a while. And I'm sure he feels that this moment has only arrived exactly because of the military threat that North Korea poses. Take you back to September 2017 when he was busy testing his missiles, and it made me think of Thomas Pynchon in A Screaming Comes Across the Sky. Gravity's Rainbow is a 1973 novel by Thomas Pynchon, which is about the design, the production and dispatch of V-2 rockets by the German military. In particular, it features the quest undertaken by several characters to uncover the secret of a mysterious device named the Schwarzgerät, the black device, slated to be installed in a rocket with the serial number 00000. As the world watches Pyongyang, I cannot help wondering if Kim Jong-un has read Thomas Pynchon, who speaks of a screaming coming across the sky. It is a curve each of them feels, unmistakably it is the parabola. They must have guessed once or twice, guessed and refused to believe that everything always collectively had been moving toward that purified shape, latent in the sky, that shape of no surprise, no second chance, no return. And in 2010, I wrote a piece, Far Away, Distant Lands Lies the Hermit Kingdom. And I said then they've all had tiny little hands like the elves and the shoemaker. And that this country has nuclear weapons, and on its border with its neighbor South Korea sit 25,000 American soldiers. Interesting article in the New York Times how Xi Jinping made his power grab with stealth, speed, guile. The decision was abruptly announced only last week, days before the annual session of China's legislature, the National People's Congress. The delay was apparently an effort to prevent opposition from coalescing before formal approval of the change by the legislator's nearly 3,000 members. It demonstrates Xi's penchant for rule breakings of Christopher Johnson. It's slowly, and when no one's looking, he turns around and does something big. I think it comes back to the political shock and awe that really dates back to his arrival. And then concludes with a comment, I think we should give Xi 20 years to accomplish the Chinese dream and give us back a strong China, said a Congress delegate. The previous 10-year limit doesn't mesh with China's long-term development. I wrote a piece, Xi Jinping, President for Life. Take a look at that. That was written last weekend. Resetting India-China relations makes sense. This is N.K. Badrakumar. The government's advisory to senior officials to stay away from the functions commemorating the Dalai Lama's 60th year in exile has generated much excitement. India stands to gain nothing by annoying China on an issue that falls squarely within the domain of its domestic affairs. Indeed, China has taken note of the GOI advisory. The Global Times commented that it signified a subtle hint that India wanted to improve ties with Beijing. The year 2018 is important for China and India after their relations were severely strained last year by multiple disputes, including more than 2 months of standoff at the Doklam Plateau. Neither of the two Asian powers wants to see this happen again. They need to enhance communication and properly manage their disputes, a situation in which Tibet is a critical issue. Then Badrakumar saying, generally speaking, rivalry arises within a peer group, but in this case, China happens to have an economy over 5 times the size of India's. Our mantra has been that India will eventually overtake China circa 2050, but in the long run, we're all dead, aren't we? Badrakumar, the point is, despite Doklam, despite the Dalai Lama or the border dispute, and despite the Chinese-Pakistan economic corridor or other differences, China has consistently, he says, commended Modi's reform agenda. He says the muscularity of the last 3 years didn't bring any dividends, and if anything, Chinese attitudes only hardened. The Indians will capitulate, I'm afraid. You can dress it up any which way you want, but that's the direction of travel. Of course, I take you back to Wang Yi, who rather subtly said the Chinese dragon and the Indian elephant must not fight, but should dance together, indeed, on their terms, no doubt. Xi Jinping, in my view, is making a pygmy of India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is surrounded on all sides. Erik Prince's House Intel testimony is remarkable. He has a terrible case of amnesia. Take a look at this from Scott Stedman. Both look thrilled. MBS Saudi Arabia visiting with the Queen. That's from Josie Saw. November 2017, I said the paranoia in the palaces in Saudi Arabia is real and existential. Yesterday, Saudi prince was quoted as saying Turkey is part of a triangle of evil. Along with Iran and hardline Islamist groups. The Saudi prince accused Turkey of trying to reinstate the Islamic Caliphate, abolished nearly a century ago when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. Of course, I'll take you back to the quote he said when he was asked why doesn't he talk with Iran. He said, how can I communicate with them while they prepare for the arrival of Al-Mahdi al-Montazar? In November 2017, I said this is an unprecedented moment in the history of the kingdom and the most perilous moment for the House of Saud that I can recall. The year today's world, 1978, the year today's world was made. It's a very interesting piece in RT by Neil Clark, and he's not wrong. And it's a very interesting article he's written there. It was the year of three popes, the battle between a dove and a hawk in the US, protests against the Shah of Iran, and a fateful error by the UK Labour Prime Minister. I started my schooling in the UK in January 1979, so I remember that winter of discontent very, very well. Have a read. It's actually a very outstanding critique of that period and its influence on where we sit today. The Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin is seen in this photograph with Zbigniew Brzezinski, who's now passed away. During a keynote on November the 8th, a DHS official admitted that he and his team of experts remotely hacked into a Boeing 757. And that goes back to my piece in August 2014. The signal announcing this new arrhythmic normal was the disappearance of MH370. And I then quoted Don DeLillo, we're not witnessing the flow of information so much as pure spectacle or information made sacred, ritually unreadable. The small monitors of the office, home and car become a kind of idolatry here, where crowds might gather in astonishment. 10-year bond yields fell back to pre-ECB levels after ECB revised lower its inflation forecast for 2019 to 1.4% from 1.5%. Currency markets, let's take a look at that. Euro dollar 123.15, that coming off initially, it spiked up, I think as high as 124. Dollar index 90.16, Japanese yen, that softened up on this sort of calming, soothing of Korean Peninsula nerves, 106.70, Swiss franc 0.9521, the pound 138.08, the Australian dollar 0.7793, the Indian rupee 65.125, South Korean won 1069.08. That's firm as well. Brazilian real 326.77, Egyptian pound 17.6175, election happening soon there. South African rand 11.90. Dollar index, I'm putting up a 3-month chart. We've come back above 90. People are not so fearful of these tariffs, and that's why I've seen a bit of recovery in the dollar. Look at this euro dollar chart from yesterday. That's from T Commodity. We're now at 123.15. Crucial level for Bitcoin to hold, says Peter L. Brandt. We're currently at 8,750. We've been well above 10,000 not too long ago. Commodity markets, gold, that's come off its highs. We're now at 1875. Look at this diamond formation on crude oil before it fell close to 50, close to below 60. We're now trading at $60.24. Copper at a crossroad here, he says as well. Pakistan refutes IMF report as it eyes bonds and China funding. The IMF, in a statement this week, said the South Asian nation's economy faces continual erosion, and its widening external and fiscal imbalances mean that risks to Pakistan's medium-term capacity to repay the fund have increased since completion of a 3-year $6.6 billion bailout program that ended in September 2016. Pakistan's current account deficit could reach 4.8% of GDP in the year ending June. Pakistan's economy is growing at its fastest rate in a decade. It's around 5% on the back of China's Belt and Road Initiative. It has also come under strain in the past year. Current account and trade deficits have widened as exports lag regional peers, while foreign exchange reserves have dropped 27% to $12.3 billion in the past year. Need to keep an eye on that. Pakistan stock market, I think, was the worst performer last year. Tillerson arrives in Addis Ababa. This is a photograph by Jonathan Ernst. He's on a 5-country swing across Africa, has emphasized his trip is aimed at hearing African leaders' concerns. The purpose of my trip into the continent is that we listen, Tillerson said. I think it's important to listen what the priorities of the continent are. We are not in any way attempting to keep Chinese investment dollars out of Africa. They are badly needed, he said in a meeting with Moussa Faki. However, we think it's important that African countries carefully consider the terms of those investments. In this photograph, he's seen boarding his plane in Addis Ababa on his way to Djibouti. His common message has been how African countries should weigh Chinese loans carefully. Africa in the red, increasing debt in many African countries is a cause for worry. This is an article in The Economist. A fool's bargain. That is how Idris Deby, Chad's president, now describes the state oil company's decision to borrow $1.4 billion from Glencore. In 2014, the loan was to be repaid with future sales of crude, then trading above $100 a barrel. But 2 years later, as the price dived, debt payments were swallowing 85% of Chad's dwindling oil revenue. 2012, the median debt level in sub-Saharan Africa was 30%. Today, it's over 50%. Moody's estimates that African banks' exposure to sovereign debt is often 150% of their equity, so a sovereign debt crisis could turn into a banking one. It's the common man that actually bears the brunt. The people of Chad are now paying for Mr. Deby's foolish bargain, would surely agree. Returning to Tillerson, we're not in any way attempting to keep Chinese dollars from Africa, he said, but it is important that African countries carefully consider the terms of those agreements and not forfeit their sovereignty. This followed a speech earlier this week in which he criticized China's approach to Africa, which he said encouraged dependency through opaque contracts and predatory loan practices. Oftentimes, financing models are structured in a way that the country, when it gets into trouble financially, loses control of its own infrastructure or its own resources through default. Think Sri Lanka, think Hambantota Port. African nations should not forfeit any elements of your sovereignty as you enter into such arrangements with China. The comments drew a quick response from Sergei Lavrov. Speaking during a visit to Zimbabwe, he said it was not appropriate for Mr. Tillerson to criticize the relations of his hosts when he was a guest there. Beijing overtook Washington as the largest trade partner with Africa in 2009. And of course, the Trump administration has been very slow to make Africa appointments, which we know about. When you look at the set of countries that are being visited, I think it kind of reinforces the perception that security indeed is the overwhelming focus. I tend to agree with that. Yet, as Tillerson said, guns and arms only buy us time. They won't address extremes in poverty, limited infrastructure, predatory governance, inadequate healthcare. Last year, U.S. exports to Africa were the lowest they've been since 2006. How did Tillerson manage to keep his job? Is a great article in The Atlantic. Bear in mind he's called his boss a moron. He's said his boss speaks for himself. It's pretty remarkable, actually. This is a short clip from Haru Mutasa, Zimbabwe's President Mnangagwa, meeting with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Apparently, Tillerson and Lavrov were in the same Ethiopian hotel, the Sheraton, but can't agree on a meeting. I said a bit tongue-in-cheek that there's a very nice nightclub there where they could have met undercover at the Sheraton Addis. Figure of the week, Africa's new trading partners. That's via Brookings Institute. Take a look. Indeed, over the last decade, trade between the US and sub-Saharan African countries has stagnated or declined. And it's a good chart for you to have a look at. Ethiopia's crisis is short, deepens as Africa Confidential. The Tigrayan leaders may plump for another southern Enshifaro. But whoever becomes prime minister will wield power that is rigorously circumscribed by the Security High Command. Ethiopia's crisis is short to deepen. As I said, in 2016, the government needed to change tack and effect a course correction, and history shows us that this course correction is one of the most difficult things to pull off. The cushion bearer, the emperor, was very short and therefore had to be perched on cushions so as not to be beneath his subjects, became an all-powerful figure in the imperial court. That's referencing a book called The Emperor by Richard Kapuscinski, in which he also said, you don't understand a thing, I'm not writing so the details add up, the point is the essence of the matter. South African all shares down 0.97% this year. Dollar versus Rand last trading at 11.90. I'm still on the view we're going to 11. His tone has turned dark with threats and talks of conspiracies, as The Economist. That's President Fatah al-Sisi. Nigerian all share up 12.68% so far this year. Ghana's stock exchange composite index is up 26.43% this year. Interesting article in the FT, but African governments taking a tough stand against foreign investors. That's by David Pilling, talking about Gabon, Djibouti seizing the Port Bank, Magufuli, DR Congo, and it's a very interesting article. Africa Confidential again, in Kenyatta's second term, the kid gloves are off, and I think the president's taken a much more robust attitude towards things. That's very fair. Kenya runs out of money. Now that's a clickbait right. That's Matthias Althoff taking a headline off Bloomberg. The Treasury Secretary Henry Rotich has dismissed media reports that the government is broke as fake news. But however, those reports were derived from what he said. But obviously he's been pushed back a little bit. Yesterday the CS had signalled to senators that the annual allocation to county governments will be reduced by 18 billion shillings, while that of the national government will be cut by 60 billion. He has to cut. And he's trying to socialise the problem. Growth in credit to the private sector slowed to the weakest pace since 2001. It's growing at 2.2%. It grew at 2.2% in July. This is all about the rate caps. If it goes on for another 1-2 years, it's going to destroy the financial services sector. That's Joshua Oigaro talking about those rate caps. KCB reported full year results yesterday. The share price corrected, but it remains up 12.865% year to date. Nairobi all shares up 5.88% year to date and less than 0.5% off an all-time high. Equity Bank is up and eye-popping 20.125% year to date. NSE 20 up 0.21% so far this year. WPP Scan Group is down 10.52%, trades on a trading PE of 15.1785. Chinese demand for Equus africanus is booming, says The Economist. In Kenya's Rift Valley, it's a hard place, water is short and the dusty bush, so businesses tend not to thrive, but one industry is booming. At the edge of Mogosho, a town of roadside shops, hundreds of donkeys graze along the road. They are waiting to be sold for slaughter at the local abattoir. Next to a lorry, a woman in a shimmering dress says she has brought 100 donkeys from Moyale. 2 days drive north. She expects to make several $1,000s from the sale. Across Africa, donkeys are used as beasts of labour. Most Kenyans turn up their noses at the idea of eating them. But Chinese entrepreneurs have opened up a new market. In China, donkey skins are used to make gelatine called ijiao that is used as a traditional medicine. The meat is also a delicacy. The abattoir in Baringo has been running for almost 2 years, slaughtering hundreds of donkeys a day to satisfy Chinese demand. Saying the slaughterhouse employs 400 people. He's reasonably well paid packaging skins. He gets health insurance, a housing allowance, and 20,000 shillings a month, which is a very good salary in Kenya, particularly out where he is. Of course, people are up in arms, saying it's completely decimating the donkey population here in Africa. So, I appreciate you stopping by. I wish you a great weekend.